Have you ever realised that you've handed over control of your life without noticing, relying on one institution, one income, one identity? Dependency feels like security until it's ripped away. If you're ready to take back accountability, this episode is for you. Welcome to the Men's Mental Health and Movement Podcast. One step stronger, live longer. Today, my guest is David Jarvis, a British Army veteran who served 21 years before being medically discharged with devastating impact on his mental health. Just as life was starting to get better again and he was ready to head off to the Invictus Games, David was diagnosed with life-threatening type 1 diabetes. 4 months later, David defied medical advice and won gold. David's story is about the difference between responsibility and accountability and what happens when you refuse to let circumstances define you. So David, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Yeah, glad to be here.
You were known as the unluckiest man in NATO while serving, and that's quite a reputation. What does that mean, and why did that happen?
So the diabetes and the medical discharge aren't really the first sort of challenges I've had to deal with. Roll the clock back a few years whilst I was in the service still. I just seemed to go through a bit of a period where just one bad thing happened after another. And some of these things were, bad relationship with people in work, that meant taking disciplinary action against people and things like that. And all the drama that comes with doing something like that when you're working relatively closely with people. Then you've got the sort of training things that were going on at the time and the level of stress that we were doing. So I was on a course at the time where we were doing an engineering degree, but where they would typically take 4 or 5 years, we were doing it in 18 months. So you can imagine the level of studying we're doing in our free time to do it. And then add into the mix as well that the wife and I were trying for kids. This course was 18 months long and we'd been trying for kids. We'd had a couple of miscarriages. We managed to get pregnant, only to lose our son as well, really young due to heart problems as well, all in the midst of this 18-month block. And as a result, I just seemed to attract one problem after another. And that's where the name came from, really. The military are quite good at making a bit of banter out of bad situations, and it usually helps people to get people back up again, if that makes sense. But yeah, essentially that's where the name comes from. It's not a pleasant story, but you've got to look back and think, what did I learn from it? And yeah, it was a challenging time, shall we say.
Yeah, I can imagine that must have been really difficult to have been something so intense and then that happening. So that must have been really hard for you and your wife. So 21 years in the British Army, 3 tours of Afghanistan, and then August 2021, you told you were getting medically discharged. Take me back to that moment and how you got that news and what went through your mind.
Well, the truth be told is I knew it was possible. It's not like it could jumps out and just hit you like a ton of bricks. I knew it was possible I could be medically discharged, but because I was so close to the end, so a typical career in the military, in the army at least, was 22 years at that time. So at that point, you could either extend and stay in longer, which was what I was planning to do, or you could leave at 22 and essentially get your pension, from that point, my wife and I, we were expecting our second at this point. My eldest was turning 3 about a week or so after the day I got the decision, and we were expecting our second in the December of 2021. So we were planning on getting another couple of years out of it. The ideal time would be to get to a point where my second daughter would be old enough to start primary school. So what's that, about 5 years old? So that way we could build up to a point of having a reasonable base foundation, if that makes sense, for the kids. So we knew it was possible, but I didn't really think it would happen because most of my job was desk bound. I didn't need to deploy, but the unit I was in, I was in a deployable role, if that makes sense. So it wasn't that we were deploying; it was the potential to deploy, and that was why they made the decision in the end. Because I had an array of injuries. Most limbs have got something wrong with it in some way, shape, or form. I just tell people I'm a walking bag of disaster, basically. It's a lot easier saying that than giving them the list. But when the doctor said it to me, it was a bit surreal to start with. I didn't really. The bit that really hit home was the end of the conversation. So to kind of put a bit of context on it, the phone call was about 3 hours long. Usually you'd sit in front of a board of doctors. They'd look at your medical report, which mine was quite a sizable document, as you can imagine. They'd look at all the history, the evidence. They'd ask you your opinions on various bits and pieces, what you think you can do. They'll take into account what your chain of command think as well, and so on. And then they'll make a decision based on all that in how much value they think you can add, And but because it was a pandemic, mine was done over the phone. So I'm sat on this call for 3 hours. And the end of it was the bit that really did it. And it's where the doctor basically said, and she was perfectly nice, perfectly fine. It wasn't a horrible conversation, but it's just what has to be said at the end. And I was to cease all work from that point on, hand over anything that's outstanding, and begin focusing on my resettlement, because my discharge date would be final. And anything after, if I hadn't finished anything by that point, I wouldn't get a chance to come back to it, period.
Right.
And that was quite, it was very surreal putting the phone down and going, so do I just stop work now, just like that? It's quite an odd one to really, and it took a few weeks for it to really sink in properly, because my unit was on summer leave. They had that block leave, so most of the unit were away. I was part of like a skeleton crew that was looking after the headquarters, if that makes sense. So it wasn't until 3 weeks later that the wheels started turning. And then it really took off, and that's when the challenges really started. Learning to write CVs again, interview techniques, looking for jobs, and trying to figure out what I wanted to do, and so on and so forth. And it was just a whirlwind, really. So
wow. So you described that kind of like unexpected medical discharge as a devastating effect on your mental health. What did that devastation look like for a man who's spent his whole adult life as a soldier?
Well, this was, so we've mentioned about responsibility and accountability, and this was like the short, sharp shock, that demonstrated the difference between the two for me. I mean, simply put, responsibility you can delegate to anyone, but accountability is literally where the buck stops. And that's exactly what happened. And I really found that out the hard way, because I'd become somewhat institutionalized being in the military, gotten used to the military, giving my responsibilities and for all intents and purposes, ignoring them, and just taking it for granted. The military would do certain things like paying my council tax, making sure I was getting the various amenities to my accommodation and to my house. Because I lived on the base, you see, with the wife, having cheap rent and all that kind of stuff. So getting out, it was learning all that for the first time, and learning it the hard way. Because where you'd normally get a slow release back to civilian life over 2 years, we were doing it in the space of a few months. And you do get a little bit of help, but whilst you're trying to do all these little training courses and apply for jobs and figure out what you're doing, then add into the mix that Storm Arwen hit right in the middle of that, and home was the epicenter up in Banff, in the northeast. And then the fact that my daughter, my youngest, ended up coming 4 weeks early. And my wife went into stage 1 labour, but had to stay in hospital for 2 weeks as well. I think it was 2.5 weeks, in fact, before she finally went stage 2, and then she was born in about 30 minutes. During which time I had to be a stay-at-home parent for my eldest, even though I'd been away from home most of the time and just coming home on weekends. And at the same time, I'm trying to do interviews and do extra bits of training and use my learning credits and things like that. So I was studying to get my ticks in the box to be a project manager and things like that, So adding it all together, it was like non-stop. It was a barrage of different information and different things I had to do and responsibilities, whilst figuring out where we're going to live. What we're going to do with my car payments, my phone payments, and how can I guarantee I'm going to be able to support my family. And it really was quite overwhelming. My usual de-stressing was doing my physical training. Cycling, weight training, that kind of stuff. All of that got turned off like that. The moment I started resettlement, I didn't have time for it. I just literally didn't have any time for it. And I could have prioritized it looking back, but I was so focused on what am I going to do with my family. I need to support them. I've got to get everything done, and I have only got so much time to do it. The blessing in disguise is that when Emily was born, the military had to give me another 2 weeks paternity leave. So my discharge date got moved back 2 weeks. So that gave me a bit of a fudge factor, if that makes sense. So there was a little bit of a blessing in disguise there. But I do joke with when I talk about it, in that I still don't know which one caused more chaos, Storm Arwen or my daughter when she was born, because they both came at the same time. And my wife tells me that she remembers Aberdeen Hospital shaking because she was in the hospital when it hit, So
wow.
It's all good fun. But yeah, it was all condensed in that one block of about 2-3 months. So it was, once the date came, and the last day in the military was the 28th of January, I'd lucky enough to start a job doing project management with a company based out of Glasgow, who I was able to work from home for. But I was on apprenticeship wages at the time for about a few weeks. So I was quite lucky with that 2-week overlap. Otherwise, it would have been quite a shock, in terms of downscale of wages, if that makes sense. Going from like a normal wage packet to apprentice wage, it's quite a difference. So I was lucky there. But once the dust had settled and the last day came, it was just like, well, who do I call now? I've got to figure out where the doctors are and where the dentist is, and how do I pay my council tax bill, and where do I put my bins out on the street, and do I need to get up and ball my boots and shave now every morning like I was before? Do I have to have straight lines down my track? It's those usual sort of routine things as well that you get up. But everything about my day had changed. It was, where's the routine was the anchor, the foundation. You get up and go through the motions. Well, what am I going through those motions for now? Do I need to go through, and what are the motions I need to go through? How do I make all this work? But it just didn't seem to stop, because the next bit we realised was that the house we were in was too small. It was a 2-bedroom semi-detached house, ex-council place. With me working from home, having 2 kids as well, and my wife starting to work from home for the NHS, there wasn't space, so we had to get somewhere else. And which we had to do very quickly, and that's when I learned the hard way as well. Started learning financial literacy, because when we applied for the mortgage and we were accepted, we then sold the first house with the intent of getting the second, only to find out that the mortgage nearly fell through because I didn't know the impact of changing jobs so soon, so close to doing it, if that makes sense, so close to getting the mortgage. Having the car payments and all that kind of stuff, I had to sell my car, sell various other things to get my bills down, to get my affordability score up, to then enable the mortgage to go ahead. So I ended up actually being homeless for 6 weeks. My wife and kids had to go down south to Birmingham to my in-laws to stay with them. And I was sofa surfing up here till I get the house right as well. So even when I got out of the military, it just didn't stop, So when we say it's devastating, it didn't really hit home until, I would say, the summertime, really. Luckily, though, I'd already been put in contact with a veteran charity called Combat Stress. So they'd started helping me, and, because I'm with the PTSD and stuff like that as well. But it was getting that routine started, and I just didn't get the chance to do that, if that makes sense. If it wasn't for the charity that then linked me into the Invictus Games and the Royal British Legion, who look after Team UK, which then started from the back end of 2022 by this point. So the decision came in the August 21. My last day in the army was January 22. The house move was finally completed by July, and we were in the house where I am now. And then I started in with Combat Stress, I think within a few weeks before or after that, I think somewhere in there. And then I started doing the Invictus Games, sort of the pre-selection training camps in the October, I think it was. That was things starting to improve at that point. So it was non-stop.
That sounds like a whole like cacophony of stress all wrapped up into one. So January 22 you left the army. January 23 you're selected for the Invictus Games. And that's literally everything turning around. What did that selection, being selected for the Invictus Games, mean to you?
It marked a turn, if that makes sense. So all the stuff I'd gone through, there was lots of other little challenges amongst that as well. That just everything just seemed to compound on itself. So when that decision came, It was quite strange because the email came in and had a big bold red lettering at the top. It said, "You are embargoed. You're not to talk about this out in the public forum. You only to keep it within your family and close friends. Do not talk about press, social media, whatever." So that was another first experience for me, seeing big red letters, "You're embargoed." I've seen secret, seen top secret, but I've never seen embargoed. So that was quite cool. But yeah, it was an incredibly nice feeling because it just seemed to make everything that had happened that bit more worthwhile, if that makes sense. It was like, this is a turning point. I can start trying to get myself back in order again, get myself back into my sport again, because the one thing I'd lost over that whole previous year was the motivation to get my training, get my fitness going, and I'd lost so much fitness. I'd been drinking more just because it helped me relax in the evening after all the stresses, and yeah, it gave me that. It made me feel like I had something else to aim at now. I was part of a team. It wasn't just about me, and it would help me get my motivation back to start going, getting back into my fizz again.
Yeah, so you applied when you applied to be part of the Invictus Games. You applied to be part of a team. We know sort of aspirations or podium placings, and that's quite humble. And I know I've been speaking to you prior to us starting the recording that you strike me as quite a humble guy. What were you actually hoping to get out of it then? If it weren't like a podium or a place, or what was in your mind there?
It was just I wanted to get my motivation back, because fitness has always been a part of my life. I mean, I grew up in a tiny little village in northeast of Scotland, and games and playing with the mates involved running around the Ulu just pretending to be soldiers or playing football in the field. There wasn't really much in the village, and Aberdeen was about an hour's drive away. I think Peterhead was the nearest town, and that was 30 minutes drive away. And obviously we were dependent on public transport as youngsters. And then when we were even younger, my mum and dad had to drive us into Peterhead, where we learned to swim. So there wasn't, so anything we did involved running around. Running was like a staple part of my daily diet, if that makes sense. So losing the motivation to do it, having that release, if that makes sense, to do my fizz, it was kind of like what helped me free my mind, if that makes sense. Daft as that sounds. So that's what I wanted back in a nutshell. That motivation, the idea that I can just get in and go and do it again, rather than just, easily find the excuses not to. So I went there with intent.
It's a very big carrot.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah. Because it's you're on a world stage. Even though I'd never been on a world stage before, that you're going to be seen. So you don't really want to make yourself look like a prat as well. It's another good incentive to get into it. So I just wanted to milk everything I could out of it. So I didn't just sign up for the cycling. I signed up for powerlifting, signed up for swimming, and for indoor rowing as well. Because you could do up to 4 events as long as they didn't coincide on the games. So I just went there to milk everything I could out of it in a nutshell. And just get the most I could towards my recovery journey, basically.
Yeah, that's quite interesting that you're going to go across 4 different disciplines. Most people who are kind of athletes, they stick to one thing, don't they? Unless you like doing decathlon or something like that. But doing cycling and powerlifting, they're what I could say they're as diametrically opposed as possible. But we'll find out more about that in a minute. So in April 2023, you decided that you were going to do an endurance charity ride. Tell me about what happened there.
So it's one I've done before. It's the ETAP Loch Ness, which for all intents and purposes is just a lap of the loch. So 100 kilometres. I was doing it for Erskine, which is a veterans charity based down in the Central Belt. They're really good charity who I've supported for a long, long time. And when I did my medical discharge, the primary recovery unit that I was working from in Edinburgh was actually built onto the Erskine Hospital. So I'd actually seen, what they get up to firsthand. So I wanted to kind of do something for them. And I wanted to obviously incorporate it as part of my training as well. Because I didn't just want to do the sport. I wanted to enjoy doing it as well. So it wasn't a race. It was just me just riding around with a bunch of other people, basically. Granted, there was more like 10,000 people, it wasn't just a couple of mates, but it was good. So, but I'd done it before and had it all the data stored on Strava, as they say, if it's not on Strava, it doesn't count. So, this time, however, when I finished, I didn't have any problems at the time doing it. I felt like I'd put in the reasonable amount of effort, just like I had the previous time. But when I compared the numbers, the power numbers weren't quite right. They were off, and I expected them to be a little bit better, because I'd been training for a few months at this point. And it wasn't enough to ring any alarm bells, but it was enough to make me notice that something was a bit different, But I put it down to the fact of what I'd been going through over the last year, you see. So nothing else. There was nothing else that kind of made me think that there was anything untoward at that time. Just basically, I was coming back from what I'd been through over the last year, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's so you got in there. You thought, yeah, we're doing fine, but something seemed to be off. When did the symptoms start of what was going on?
So on the 1st of May, because I was weighing myself periodically, because I wanted to lose a little bit of weight. I had gained weight over the last year, which is another reason why I thought, it's maybe explained the power numbers on the bike when I did the ETAP. But on the 1st of May, I was 86.5 kilos. And I noticed that my weight was coming down over the next few days to a week. Not enough to ring alarm bells at this point, but I was also noticing I was getting more tired all the time. I was getting generally more thirsty all the time. And I'm not one for soft drinks and squash and all that kind of stuff. I'll typically just eat water or coffee anyway. But I found I was drinking more, and I was still thirsty. I found I was getting more and more lethargic. So I was eating more to try and accommodate for that, and I was eating more fruit and more fruit juice. Trying to be reasonably healthy. By the end of the first week, I was up to about 4,000 calories a day. I was about 250% my protein intake as well. But I was still getting more tired. But I put that down to the fact that I was going to the toilet more, especially through the night. And even though I was drinking more water, I was still thirsty. But the point of that is that everything seemed logical. So I was going to the toilet more, but then I was drinking more. I was tired more, but then I was not sleeping as much, so everything seemed logical. During my military career, I was also a physical trainer, and during various studies and stuff, I'd come across diabetes in my textbooks and things, but I've never been around people with it. So the thought of diabetes never crossed my mind. But I was trying to come up with my own solution to the problem, if that makes sense, which is why I increased my calorie intake, why I increased my fruit, and so on and so forth. But by the 15th of May, I'd kind of given in on my own. I thought, right, it's time to call the doctors now. The weight is dropping off me at this point. I think I was 73 kilos by the 15th of May.
So you'd lost like 12 kilos in 12 days? Yeah. Wow. That must have been quite scary when you realised the numbers, no?
Exactly, yeah. And the 15th was a Monday, because it was the day before I kind of recognised this, and I was starting to get worried at this point. But because it was Sunday, I couldn't call the doctors, and I was like, I'm still functioning. I'd been to a local time trial event in Elgin, I think it was the 8th or the 9th of May. And again, the power numbers are what you expect. They were dropping really far back. And I was just paying more attention at this point. So the 15th was the point I gave up, and I went, well, technically it was the 14th, but it was a Sunday. So Monday the 15th, I called my GP and I said, look, losing loads of weight. I can't explain why. I'm eating so much food, but I don't know what's going on. I need some help. So he took some blood, asked me some questions, and then they went off to do the tests. In hindsight, if I'd have told him all the symptoms, they might have quickly got to the conclusion that it could have been diabetes, But anyway, a couple of days later, I get a phone call, and they call us in. I think it was the Thursday, and they called me into my local GP, and they said, look, sorry to tell you this, but we're 99% sure it's type 1 diabetes. Your blood sugar's through the roof. We're going to give you a shot of insulin, and then we're going to send you to Aberdeen where the specialists are. So they gave me a shot of insulin, and I had the best night's sleep I'd had since the end of April. And then I went into Aberdeen on the 19th. This was the Friday, and that's when they confirmed it. And they said, yeah, it's so bad, in fact, that they showed me a traffic light scale. Like you can Google HbA1c test result, and it goes amber, red, green, and at the green end it's like 40, and at the red end it's 119 with the black arrow pointing at it saying, if you're here, you need to get emergency help now. I was 147. They said they hadn't seen numbers that high in I don't know how long. So,
147.
147, yeah.
Wow. That's that. I mean, when you saw that, how did that make you feel?
Well, that's what made it feel serious at that point, because bear in mind, I'm still functioning up to this point. I was still working, I was still, logging in, doing my work as a project manager. I was still trying to train as best I could. I was still obviously looking at helping with the kids and, spending time with the wife and doing the housework and DIY as best I could, but they'd made it plain. They showed me this scale and seeing that visually and then pointing, going, yeah, you're way off the scale of here. The doctor kind of said at that point, he said, yeah, it might have only been another couple of days or so, a few days max, and you wouldn't be sat here now. We're amazed you stood up right now, So, and that's what really hit it home and made me realise how serious it was, really. So, yeah.
Yeah. So your doctors and your team manager for the Invictus Games team, they advise you to quit the Invictus Games team, basically, and to focus on getting better. I mean, most people would generally listen to that. Why didn't you?
Well, I mean, don't get me wrong, it was definitely sensible advice, and I don't owe anything on them for it, because that's exactly what, like you said, what most people would do, and should do. And maybe I should have done the same thing as well, possibly. But I looked at it and went, because the key thing with the Invictus Games is you can only compete twice in your lifetime. It's not like the Olympics or the Paralympics where you can keep going back as long as you're competitive. You can only do it twice as a competitor. So I didn't know if it would hold against me. I didn't know if I'd get selected again. And this was kind of another example to me, because I've had some close encounters in the past where life is short, and I was like, right. Because the way I did it was, I basically said to the doctor, I said, give me the weekend to think about it. And I said the same thing to the team manager as well. So give me the weekend to think about it. And I'll come back with a decision on Monday, And I got up the following morning, and I'm an early riser. I get up like 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning normally. And I've got a kind of a process that I follow with regards to problem solving and dealing with challenges. And I kind of just went through the motions with it. So the first step is to do something simple, which for me is to go and get a brew, and I'm sat in the kitchen, and the next step, sat in the kitchen with a brew, and the next step is to keep it simple, to give it a kiss, as I like to say. So I got all the paraphernalia and bump and medical supplies and everything, these 2 great big shopping bags full of stuff that this hospital had given me. And I laid it all out on the kitchen table. And it literally covered the table. It was, we're talking like a normal sort of 6-seater table, and it literally covered it. I had enough space for my mug in front of me, and that was it. And I just kind of, and the third step is to understand the problem. And it just kind of occurred to me that, this is going to be a massive challenge. I've got to basically unlearn everything I thought I knew about training and nutrition and everything in order to make it all work and piece it all back together again. I need something that's going to keep me focused on this, because it's going to be that much of a challenge. And that's when I kind of had this bit of an epiphany. And the line that kind of I used it in Scottish Parliament literally a few weeks ago, in September, sorry, that the significance of the goal has to match the scale of the challenge. And I thought, right, if I'm going to take this on and I'm going to do it effectively, I need to set the bar high here. I can't keep going just with the aim of getting better and looking after my recovery, and hoping the injuries will get themselves sorted out, and whatever. I need to go that step above. That lot's got to be parked now. The recovery journey's got to be sidelined completely. It's got to be the top spot or nothing. It is literally go big or go stay at home. It's gold or nothing. Done deal. And that was that Saturday morning. It didn't even take me 24 hours to come to that conclusion. And then the Monday morning, I'd already by Monday morning, I'd already started that journey, if that makes sense. And it wasn't a sort of a little debate with the doctor. I told him it was a 2-minute conversation, that this is what I'm doing, and that's that. And he could kind of see that I wasn't taking the piss. There's nothing in my mind.
I love that. That's a real mindset shift over a very short period of time. And what I find to be quite interesting is that you went from being kind of like, oh yeah, I'm going to join the team and I'm going to be part of the group and I'm going to enjoy this and get my fizz back, to I'm going to win gold, like a very, very different approach to everything. So when you were testing your blood sugar, it was like 30 times, you're doing that like 30 times a day initially. Yeah. Is that right?
So it didn't start like that. It grew up to that. And technically it was the worst day was actually 43 blood tests a day in one day. but it started. So the NHS, what they tell you as a diabetic is you need to test your blood sugars 4 times a day. And then I got given 2 types of insulin, which I'm still on the same ones now. And I was having to inject 5 times a day as well. So those 43 tests, that doesn't include the insulin injections. So there's more needles on top of that again. So, but it starts off with 4 blood tests a day, and it's basically a finger prick. You get a dab of blood, you put it on a little pad, chuck it in a reader, and then it tells you what your blood sugar is in that live moment. You do it once before each meal and once before bed, and then that enables you to determine what insulin you're going to take, combined with the knowledge of how much carbohydrates is in your food. Now, I realized relatively quickly that in order to keep on top of them, I needed to test more often so I could see where they were at, especially around training. So by the end of the first week, that number had already doubled, and then by the second week, it doubled again, and so on and so on. And by the end of June, that's when I got that score of 43 recorded tests in one day. It didn't include the dud tests as well, because the problem with the swimming and with the bike, in particular, was that when you came out of the pool, your hands are all wet. So when I went to try and test, sometimes they'd be too damp, and I got a dud reading basically. So I had to do it again. So sometimes it could have been more than that. It just 43 was the number recorded at that time. And then you've got all the injections as well, and the amount of times I'd got it wrong where I'd either eaten too much or taken too much insulin or something, that I'd have to make corrections and so on and so forth. It was I had a photograph of my fingers, because it was these 3 fingers I was doing to be quick, because I'm right-handed. You see, they tell you not to use your the main fingers, because your thumb and your forefinger you tend to be your pincer ones and you grab things more. So use the 3 less used ones is what they tell you. So I was jabbing up to be quick with my right hand on my left, and I had various poke marks on these 3 fingers at one point that I thought, well, I've got to take a picture for evidence, and you can see all the marks and the little white bits all over there. It was, it's not something I think I would have struggled to do that straight away, I have to admit. But it was, by week 4, I think it was week 4 or week 5, I got that 43 recorded tests.
Yeah. So you might even be a world record holder and don't know about it.
Well, you know what? I've never thought to look at that. I might actually look at that now. You never know.
Yeah. So you're training away, you're doing all these blood tests, and then you go to Germany to training camp over there. And that sort of like disrupted all your routine, and your diet changed and everything happened. So there must have been moments there when you were there thinking, oh, I can't do this. Talk me through that.
So rolling the clock back just a little bit, just to put it a bit of context. So that bit with the tests, the hospital recognised they couldn't keep up with the rate of learning that I was doing, and they fast tracked me for what they call a continuous glucose monitor, which essentially is a CGM, which is essentially like a button shaped thing which you can stick to your arm or your leg or that, and then that links via Bluetooth to your phone, and then that can give you readings every 5 minutes. They gave me that early July, and that was game changing, because instead of me reacting to what reading I got on my blood test, I could proactively manage my my diabetes, because I could see the trend, if that makes sense. Yeah. So that changed everything, in the sense that I was able to then really focus in on my training more deliberately, and my confidence grew as a result. So by the end of July, I was doing training in my local council gym, and Aberdeenshire Council had asked me to do some PR things in return for like an athlete pass that they'd given me. And I did an interview with them at the end of July, and they asked me an array of questions. And the last question they asked me was, what are my aspirations at the games, what I want to achieve? And that was the first time I laid the gauntlet down and actually said, this is what I'm going to do. And they asked me that question. They said, what do you want to achieve? And I didn't even wait a beat. They got it on video, didn't wait a beat. It was simple. It was, I think the answer was, that's simple. I'm going there to win. And that's all I said. And that was the first time I laid the gauntlet. So my confidence was way high. And my training was getting better and better and better. So with that in mind, when I got to Germany, what I hadn't factored in was that food is different. Everything's labeled different. The supermarkets are laid out differently. So all the things I'd gotten used to, so I'd have this much, this kind of cooking, or I'd have this bit of meat, or that bit of those nuts, or that bread, or whatever. It all changed just like that. So that really kind of put me on edge, if it makes sense. I was quite literally, on the day of the race, I was quite literally on a knife edge, because I didn't know which way it was going to go, based on the fact that I'd had a lot more trouble controlling my blood sugars again, because I couldn't get the nutrition I'd been used to having in those few weeks, if that makes sense, before it. So that was a real stress factor, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that must have added to the stress no end. So, so September 23, Invictus Games, and you're doing the time trial, and you finish the time trial, you're going for gold, you're sitting there replaying it all in your mind. Strangely, your wife knows the result before you do. Take me through those moments where you're sitting not knowing what the results are. How did that feel?
So I remember, so the day before I'd been out and we'd been allowed to do our recce of the track, and I'd practiced it enough where I kind of knew where the turning points were. I could keep my head down, and I could look for certain road furniture in my peripherals, if that makes sense. So I didn't need to lift my head up. So that way I could stay more aerodynamic the whole time. So I was that focused that when I crossed the line, I just didn't see anything at all. I just rolled up all the way back to the end of the finish straight into the pit lane. I had to remember one of my coaches actually had to grab hold of me because my legs were shaking that much. I couldn't get my feet out the pedals because I was clipped in. But yeah, once I got off the bike and I wandered in, I just went back into my little corner and just hid there. I just sat there and thought about, right, what did I do at that corner? Where did I turn? Did I turn at the right moment? Was I holding enough speed there? Could I have gotten around the last corner without touching it? I was just walking it through in my mind what I did and what I could have done better, as opposed to you did everything you could have done. It was about as fast as you could have been. And yeah, it turned out that lasted about, I think it was like 25 or 30 minutes or something like that. I wasn't watching the clock, but what I realized afterwards, because my coach actually came and found me, and he just walked up to me and says, have you not seen the results yet then? I went, no, not really. I've not seen anything. I didn't know where you were. I assume we'd get told or whatever, and he said, well, you've done it. That's it. You've won. And it was, I don't know, it's strange, hard to explain, but it was just like a massive weight was lifted, because of all the pressure I put on myself and the stress I'd sort of been through. It was just like a massive weight lifted, and I just became an emotional wreck right there in front of the coach. And I think it took a few minutes to kind of get a bit of control again. And I think I was just like over the moon, like at this point. I think that's when I started getting really happy about it. But I think the real icing on the cake was, or the two bits of icing on the cake, I should say, is we went up to the end of the finish straight along with the other two medalists, and we sat there waiting to be called forward to do the presentation. And we noticed that one delay led to another delay, and then we noticed loads of the media were starting to come around. And then we kind of stopped one of the organisers and we're like, what's going on? We've had so many delays now. Now there's all this media. What's going on? And they said, well, have you not worked it out yet? It's Prince Harry himself that's coming to present the medals. Because there's so many presentations going on for all these different sports and all the different categories and so on. He couldn't do all of them, So getting him coming to do ours was quite, it was a really nice surprise and really unexpected. But it turned out that I then found out whilst we stood there waiting with other medalists that we weren't, myself and the second place guy, we were only a fraction of a second apart, but we were about 10 seconds ahead of the third place guy. But what we found out were that we were the fastest two out of everybody that had taken part. We were literally the fastest two cyclists on the track. So I literally, and it was a split second between us. I think it was like 0.5 or 4 of a second. And the claim to fame is the second place guy, a guy called Casper Holt. He was actually a guy who took one of the episodes in the Heart of Invictus documentary that was on Netflix as well. So we had a right good blether and that, and ended up becoming good mates out of it. So yeah, he's invited me over to Denmark. I invited him over here. We've haven't quite done it yet. I would love to, but it's one of them things that's on the to-do list, So, but yeah, it was a bit of a roller coaster of emotions in a very short space of time, really. Yeah.
So Prince Harry's giving you your medal. What happens after that?
The emotions all came back in again on that point. I just kind of, it was hard to keep it all in again because that was the first time I'd seen my wife in, I think, since the Wednesday as well. So this was on the Friday. The the Wednesday evening was the last time I'd seen her, because Thursday was all about preparing, getting the bike ready, doing the practice recce's. Friday was all about the racing. And then that was the first point we'd seen her. But also Prince Harry went off to the barriers and got my daughter over the barriers. She come running up. We have a great big cuddle, bearing in mind all of the world media is all bloody around us, like taking photographs and videoing, and the commentators going nuts on the speakers as well.
That's so brilliant.
I was oblivious to it all at the time, but afterwards, when you see the footage back, I'm just looking at it going, "Oh no, that wasn't me." All really embarrassing. But yeah, we then I had my daughter in my arms, and then we walked over to the barriers, and then we had a great big cuddle with my wife as well, because really my wife's the only one that saw just how much pressure I've been putting on myself in terms of what I've been doing behind closed doors, in terms of the with all the nutrition and the rest and recovery, and a lot of the training I was doing was at home in northeast Scotland. So she was the only one that saw the lengths I was going to be as deliberate as I could in keeping blood sugars under control and so on. So we had a right old emotional family moment, and my wife, Steph, she hates it because the media was all around us, like I said, and there's a particular moment where there's a photographer underneath the finish, the finish arch, and we were just in front of it. And you can see a photograph of from behind the barriers from other media where they're taking photographs, and you can see this other reporter underneath the arch on the other side of us. But then in the next photo, it's from that one as well. So you see it from both sides. So my wife describes it as you can see my ugly crying face from one angle, and you can see her ugly crying face in the other angle. So she hates it.
That's a wonderful, wonderful story, David. So you said that you've learned the critical lessons about, we touched on this right at the beginning, understanding the difference between responsibility and accountability. Can you explain that for the listeners and what the difference is?
So when I got out of the military, now don't get me wrong, when you go up the ranks, you start to recognize how you're taking on more responsibility, but you're always doing things for somebody else, if that makes sense, the higher up. So you prepare a set of orders, for example, it's the chain of command that will sign those orders, but we'll be the ones that prepare them. So we're doing it on their behalf, if that makes sense. So they're giving us that responsibility. And then we'll do the same thing below that as well. So different levels of detail will go down to different levels of rank, if that makes sense. But I hadn't really thought about it in with life in mind and typical life things in mind, because I hadn't needed to. I'd kind of used the excuse that where I was based a lot of the time so far from home, there was no reasons to try and investigate how to get a house or why to consider investing and all this kind of stuff, because I had job security. We had a house. I was so far from home, there was no point looking to buy a house up in Aberdeenshire because he would look after it. I might spend 2 weeks in it a year, which was, well, as I saw it, a bit pointless, really. And I was never interested in trying to make money or be a millionaire. So the idea of buy to let and all that kind of stuff just never crossed my mind. So when I got out, it was that realization that there was no one else looking after that stuff for me anymore. I had to figure that out for myself. I had to come up with ways to look after my family, because it wasn't about me. I had to make sure my family were provided for. With 2 young kids, one just been born, or 2 months old at this point. I couldn't just delegate that to somebody else, and that's where I come back to that definition that I gave you earlier, where responsibility, you can delegate your responsibilities to other people, but ultimately accountability is where the buck stops. It doesn't go anywhere else. If a job doesn't happen, if you let's say I give my eldest daughter a job to go and to clean the kitchen, and then she goes off to bed and hasn't done it, and then the next day I'm expecting visitors, it's on me to get the job done. I could give her a telling off the next morning and say, hey, you didn't do what I told you to do. But ultimately, it will be me that looks embarrassed. You take this a stage further. If I didn't pay the mortgage, if I delegated to my wife to say, hey, can you transfer the money to the mortgage is in my name. She doesn't do it. The bank's going to come to me to get the money. They're not going to go to my wife, So ultimately, the buck stops for me, if that makes sense. And I took that quite literally from that point. Because the other key part to that is I learned a key life lesson in that most of my career, I've always believed there was 2 certainties in life, mortality and change. Mortality, the obvious one, we're all going to meet our maker. We can do little things to mitigate that, look after our health and do a bit of fitness and, nutrition and, try to be happy all the time and so on. But ultimately it will happen. Some luck and whatever can be involved as well, but, it will happen. And the second one, change, evolution, adaptation, whatever you want to call it. We grow up, we mature, and so on. We change jobs, we move house, change. You can expect it and plan for it, or it just hits you like a ton of bricks. Either way, it's inevitable. But the other bit that the medical discharge taught me, and this is what's really key to the responsibility, accountability bit, is dependency. And that's where I'd learned that I'd been dependent on the military to do an array of different things for me, which I just, for lack of a better word, been ignorant towards. I just hadn't, given any thought to take it back off them. And so I'd become too dependent on the military. And that was the key, in that too much dependency in one thing makes us more vulnerable. And that was basically what I did to myself. So now I have taken that accountability back for a lot of the stuff that I had then, with a deliberate aim of reducing that dependency. So I've spread it out as much as I can now, so that there is no one thing that I'm dependent on anymore, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, I mean, except my wife, of course. Like, if I was the earshot of that, she'd have probably bad me before I just say it. But, yeah.
I mean, the thing about the army, military taking those responsibilities off you and providing for you, that's obviously so that you can do your job. But when you come into Civvy Street, that kind of like flips everything on its head, and you've got to learn it all again, haven't you?
Yeah. Well, but even just learning to write a CV, we did that when we were in school. When you're leaving your secondary school, you get taught all that through your guidance your teacher or whichever a teacher is at the time. But after 20 years, it's a simple skill that's easily forgotten. I had no clue how to write a CV.
Yeah, and probably changed a lot. A lot as well.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the key issues I've had from a professional standpoint is translating what I did in the military into civilian world. Up until after the Invictus Games, I put no value in a lot of the experience I had, and I was dependent on other people correcting me. A good example being, in the military, you call people personnel, whereas in business, we call them stakeholders. And there's lots of little things like that. But then add into it that the work I did in the military, I didn't know how to transfer, what benefit, what value that would have in my civil life, if that makes sense. Because I felt like I'd failed so much when I got out of the military in terms of all those things I wasn't doing that I should have been doing. I didn't put any value in any of it myself, if that makes sense. So that the pass I mentioned earlier, that Aberdeenshire Council had given me to go and use the gyms, when I got out of the military, they asked me if I'd go and speak at the local primary school and tell them about my adventures, show them some things, just what's we talking 5 years old up to 11, 12 years old. And it was there that I really started learning just how much people wanted to hear about the stories and things like that, and that's where I started putting the value in some of those experiences. And then it just kind of grew from there, if that makes sense. So, yeah.
That's great. So for a man listening, who's maybe just been told his career's over, maybe his health's failing, or everything's changed for him, what's the first thing that you'd tell him to do?
Well, the process I follow, just like I was saying to you about when the day after I got my diabetes diagnosis, is the first step in my process is to do something simple. Something incredibly simple. And for me, it's going to go and get in a brew. We're lucky in the Western world, we can just go and turn the kettle on and put some water in it, put the water in a kettle and turn it on. It's a straightforward thing to go and do, but it could be just going for a walk around the block. It could be just taking a deep breath, doing something simple. Just for me, it starts the mind off, starts you off on that logical step-by-step process towards a resolution, if that makes sense. So doing something simple just kickstarts it, that mindset, if that makes sense. And that's the first step for me, because if it's overcomplicated, it just makes it that more difficult to do.
Yeah, I love that, David. I love that. So that brings me on to my last question. Okay, my last question. The motto of this podcast is "One step stronger, live longer." What does that mean to you? I suppose it links straight back to the bit of the thing I just said there. That it's that one step. It's all it needs. You just need that one step, and as long as you keep taking that one step, you're always going to be moving forward, and that's the objective, isn't it? It doesn't matter how quickly you get there, as long as you keep moving forward. Still in that line from that Rocky movie, whichever one it was.
because the moment you stop, the moment you start going backwards, that's where the real problem starts happening. So that one step is key. You keep taking one step. That's all you need, is one step at a time. So that's what it means. That's what it means to me, because it's the first step of in my process. So yeah.
I love that. That's great. That's great, David. So listen, if the listeners want to find out more about you, maybe connect with you or book you to speak, where can they find you?
Best place is through my website, which is www.speakingsbc.com. Speaking SBC stands for Speaking Scaly Back Cyclist, which is my social media handle. But all the links are in the website.
That's great. Listen, David, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on. Inspirational and very enlightening. So thanks so much for coming on and sharing these things. And take care. Don't forget,
no worries,
one
you.
step stronger, live longer. I really hope you've enjoyed this episode and found some value in it. If you have, remember you can like, subscribe and leave a review. It will really help to get this message out to more listeners who need to hear these kind of conversations. Thanks. And don't forget, one step stronger, live longer.